3 years ago, I was on shift working dispatch for the Alaska State Troopers when I took a call that still haunts me to this day. My name is Marcus. I've worked in Anchorage for over 15 years, handling every emergency you could imagine. Domestic disputes, bear attacks, blizzards, overdoses, hikers lost to the snow. But nothing prepared me for what I heard on the night of February 14th, 2022. It was one of those brutal Alaskan winters. 2 straight weeks of temperatures below 30. The kind of cold that turns every breath into ice before it even leaves your lips. Most people stayed indoors, and the phones were quiet that night. Just the usual wellness checks and the occasional cabin fight. But then, at exactly 2047 a.m., my console lit up. The caller ID was unfamiliar, not unusual. Calls often came from borrowed phones or old landlines. But what was strange was the clarity of the line. Calls from remote areas were usually filled with static, echoes, or satellite delays. This one, crystal clear, as if the caller was right there in the next room. Alaska State Troopers, this is Marcus. What's your emergency? I asked. A man answered, middle-aged, a faint Russian accent. He spoke slowly, carefully, choosing each word. My name is Dmitry Volov. I'm calling to report my own death. At first, I thought it was a prank, or maybe a mental health crisis. We got those often, especially during the endless dark months of winter. Sir, can you repeat that? Are you injured or in danger? No, I am not injured. I am dead. I died 3 days ago in my cabin near Titna. My body is still there. Someone must come collect it before the wolves do. My fingers froze over the keyboard. Even if this was just a confused man, I needed to take it seriously. I began typing notes while keeping him on the line. All right, Dmitry, I need your exact location. Mile marker 47 on the Parks Highway, 12 miles east, Old Mining Road, the cabin with the blue metal roof. You cannot miss it. The chimney stopped smoking 3 days ago. While he spoke, I ran his name. And there he was, Dmitry Volov, age 73. Lived alone. No family. But something made my stomach turn. There was already a welfare check filed by his neighbor 2 days ago. The neighbor reported no smoke from his chimney. Dmitry never let his fire die in winter. I tried to steady my voice. Dmitry, your neighbor was worried about you. Are you inside your cabin right now? I am here, but I am not alive. I collapsed splitting firewood. My heart stopped. The snow preserved my body. It has been 72 hours. The ravens, they found me this morning. They started with the eyes. The hair on my arms stood straight up. His voice was calm, disturbingly calm, like a man reporting a broken mailbox. No panic, no confusion. Dmitry, if you're speaking to me, you're alive. Paramedics are on the way. You might be disoriented. No, you don't understand. I watched my body die. I have been watching it for 3 days. Yesterday, I could still feel the cold. Today, I cannot. Tomorrow, I will not remember how to use this phone. This is my last chance to report it properly. I kept him talking while sending patrol units. But the roads were frozen, and the nearest troopers were 40 minutes out. Dmitry, tell me what you see. I see my body, face down in the snow. The axe in my hand. My skin is purple. The ground beneath my head is stained red. The neighbor's dog sniffed me yesterday, but would not come closer. Animals know death. His tone never wavered. I felt sweat dripping down my back even in that freezing dispatch room. Then where are you calling from? I asked. From my kitchen. Looking out the window. The phone is in my hand. You won't believe me until you see it. That's why I called. So someone will know before I fade. The troopers radioed in. They had reached mile marker 47 and were turning down the mining road. 20 minutes out. Dmitry, they're almost there. They'll help you. They will find my body behind the cabin. Tell them to treat it with respect. I lived in Alaska 30, 7 years. Do not let the wolves take me. And then silence. The line didn't cut. He simply stopped speaking. I earned the right to a proper burial. The patrol unit radioed back in. They had eyes on the cabin, the one with the blue metal roof. No lights. No smoke. Just silence. They approached on foot, boots crunching over snow. Then Officer Martinez's voice broke through my headset, tense and urgent. Dispatch, we've got a body behind the cabin. Male. Elderly. Been gone a few days by the look of it. Cardiac event. We'll need the coroner. My blood ran cold. I looked at my console. The call was still connected. The line was open. Dimitri, are you still there? Silence. Dimitri, can you hear me? Nothing. Just a silence so heavy it felt alive. And then a sound. Not human breathing. It was something wet, rattling, like air being dragged through a crushed windpipe. A death rattle that should not have been on the line. And then, click. The call went dead. Martinez came back on the radio. His voice was steady but grim. The body was frozen solid, likely dead for 3 days. The axe was still gripped in his right hand. Clear signs of a heart attack while chopping wood. The generator was empty, the cabin powerless. And here's what froze me to my seat. The phone line had been cut the year before, when a tree took down the wires. There was no way that call should have happened. I stared at my screen in shock. The call had lasted 37 minutes. I had 47 full screens of notes, yet the number that rang me had been disconnected for almost a year. I never told the full story in my report. Who would believe me? Instead, I wrote it as an anonymous welfare tip, but I kept those notes. I still have them. 6 months later, I transferred out of night dispatch. I couldn't sit in that room after what I heard. Still, every time I drive past Talkeetna, I think about Dmitry Volov, about voices carried over dead phone lines, voices of the already gone, reporting deaths that happened days ago, asking for help that will never come. The coroner listed cardiac arrest as the official cause of death, 3 days before the troopers arrived. But I know Dmitry called me himself. He called, because even after death, he felt it was his duty to report it. The phone company insists no calls came from that number on February 14, 2022. They say it was impossible, but I heard his voice. For 37 minutes. And I still have the notes to prove it. My colleague Isabella was a wildlife photographer, and one of the bravest people I ever met. She'd spent over 8 years documenting Alaska's wilderness for National Geographic. I first worked with her back in 2019, guiding researchers through the backcountry. She wasn't like other photographers. Isabella had an obsessive eye for detail, and she thrived in conditions others ran from. She always said the winter revealed the truth. The land, the animals, even the light itself. Her portfolio was haunting wolves moving like shadows through blizzards, caribou stretching across frozen tundra, the northern lights glowing on glacial ice. In December 2021, she told me about a solo expedition she was planning. She wanted to capture a rare phenomenon in the Wrangell Mountains. She called them ice ghosts. These were strange formations that appeared during extreme cold snaps, when moisture froze around objects in bizarre ways. She believed the abandoned mining camp northeast of McCarthy, the one deserted since the 1940s, was the perfect place to document them. I warned her against going alone. The area was unforgiving. Temperatures dropped to 50, no cell service, no easy rescue. But Isabella was determined. She showed me her gear high-end cold weather cameras, survival supplies for 3 weeks, and a satellite communicator for nightly check-ins. We agreed, every night at 8:00 p.m., she'd send me a short message. If I didn't hear from her within 24 hours, I'd call search and rescue. On December 15th, a bush pilot named Tom dropped her at the cabin. The first 3 days went smoothly. Day 1. Arrived safe. Cabin is solid. Temperature 32. Perfect conditions for shooting. Day 2 captured incredible formations. The light is otherworldly. Day 3. Something strange near the mine entrance. Unusual formations. Staying extra day to document. Then came day 4. Her message didn't come at 8:00 p.m. It came 3 hours late. The formations are moving. I know it sounds impossible. But I have time-lapse footage. They change position when I'm not looking. I was uneasy, but not panicked. Cold and isolation could play tricks on people. Day 5. They aren't ice. I don't know what they're made of. They don't look natural. They appear in my photos, even when I can't see them with my eyes. My stomach sank. Day 6. They know I'm photographing them. More appear in every shot, either multiplying or moving closer. Day 7. I found photos on my camera I didn't take. Timestamps match when I was sleeping. Someone, or something, is using my equipment. That's when I called Tom. I begged him to do a flyover. Bad weather kept him grounded, but he promised he'd check when skies cleared. Day 8. The photos show inside the cabin, me sleeping in bed. But there are shapes standing around me. I can't see them with my eyes, only through the lens. My skin crawled as I read her words. Day 9. The camera sees what's really here. They're not ice, not ghosts. Something else entirely. They exist in a spectrum of light we can't see. Tom managed a flyover on day 10. From the air, the cabin looked fine. Smoke from the chimney, her gear outside. No sign of danger. But the weather was too rough to land. That night she messaged again. I reviewed all my photos. The shapes are in every shot, even the first ones. They've been here the whole time. They've always been here. Day 11, she left her camera on motion trigger. By morning, there were 47 photos. Dozens of tall, thin figures circling the cabin, some at the windows, others bending over her gear, watching her. Day 12, I finally understand. They want to be seen. For centuries, they've existed unseen. I'm the first to capture them. They aren't hostile, just curious. Day 13. When I show them the photos, they study them. It's like they've never seen themselves before. I think this is what they've always wanted. Proof they exist. Her final message came on day 14. I'm staying longer. This is the most important work I've ever done. Tom doesn't need to pick me up yet. I'll contact you when I'm ready. That was the last I ever heard from Isabella. When she missed her day 15 check-in, I called search and rescue. A storm delayed us, but on day 17, we finally reached the cabin. We found Isabella sitting at the small wooden table motionless. Printed photographs covered every surface, the table, the bunk, even the floor by the stove. She was alive, but locked in a catatonic stare, eyes fixed on the images spread before her. Her cameras were still running on autopilot, clicking every few minutes with a soft mechanical tap, 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 like a heartbeat that didn't belong. The photographs were the most disturbing thing I've ever seen. They showed the inside of the cabin filled with tall, impossibly thin, humanoid shapes, not shadows, not tricks of light. Their bodies looked crystalline, like ice grown into living figures. But they weren't still. In picture after picture, they were moving, leaning, turning their heads as if listening. In some shots, those things were touching her equipment, long glass, like fingers resting on tripods and lenses. In others, they faced each other in silent pairs, as if speaking without sound. The worst images were the recent ones. Isabella sat at the table, just as we had found her, only she wasn't alone. The figures stood around her, crowding close. In a few, they were touching her head and shoulders, as if feeling the shape of her thoughts. We scrolled through the photos in order and watched her posture change, day by day, becoming rigid, unnatural, almost sculpted by frost. The medical team said she was in severe hypothermia and dehydrated, but their words didn't explain what we were seeing. Her core temperature was impossibly low, too low for life, yet there was a pulse. Faint, irregular, 12 beats per minute when there should have been 60, maybe 100. We evacuated her to Anchorage General. 6 weeks passed with no real change. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, barely reacted to light or sound. Her skin stayed cold to the touch no matter what they did. Then one morning she whispered her first words, breath fogging the mask. "They are still here. They followed me." Isabella said the beings from her photographs had attached to her somehow. She could see them now without a camera, standing in hospital corridors, drifting into her room, fingers tracing the edges of the heart monitor. She swore they weren't violent, only curious. Curious about everything we built and everything we are. The doctors called it PTSD, cold-induced psychosis. But I had seen those photographs. I had seen the cameras keep shooting frames of empty spaces that were not empty. She never fully recovered. After 3 months, they let her go. But the woman who walked out was not the same one who flew into the Rangels. She became obsessed with photographing ordinary places. Parking lots at dusk, office buildings after hours, bright aisles of shopping centers at closing time. She said she was documenting the others as they explored our world. Her final exhibition, just before she disappeared, was called The Invisible Migration. Hundreds of photographs, everyday locations around Anchorage, and in every single image, if you looked carefully, those tall crystalline figures were there, studying cars, standing in doorways, observing people who didn't know they were being watched. Isabella vanished in September 2022. They found her apartment empty, except for camera gear and thousands of prints. The last images on her card showed her own bedroom. She wasn't in them. Instead, the crystalline beings filled the frame, crowding close, looking straight into the lens, as if posing for a portrait. The police marked it as a missing person case. I don't think she's missing. I think she finally went where she'd been walking all along. Somewhere between the visible world and whatever spectrum those things inhabit. I kept one of her photographs. It looks like a normal coffee shop downtown. Baristas working, customers waiting, steam rising. But if you stare past the reflections in the glass, you'll see them tall, thin, patient, watching with an intelligence that makes your skin crawl. Sometimes I think keeping that photo was a mistake. Because lately, in the corner of my eye, I catch shapes that shouldn't be there. And when I turn to look, there's nothing. Just a cold draft and the faintest impression of something tall slipping out of the light. Every summer, thousands of workers head to Alaska's fishing industry. Rashid thought it would be easy money. 6 months of hard work to clear his student loans and start over somewhere new. The poster at the Seattle Job Center made it sound almost heroic. Work the last frontier. Excellent pay. Housing provided. They did not say the cannery sat on a remote island, 40 miles from the nearest town, reachable only by boat or helicopter. They definitely did not say some workers who went to Fish Point Cannery didn't return. Rashid Hassan was 24. An engineering degree had gotten him nothing better than part-time at an auto parts store. When the recruiter promised $12 an hour plus overtime, more than he'd ever made, he signed the 6-month contract without reading the fine print. He was to fly to Kodiak, then take a company boat to the cannery on June 1, 2020. The first warning came on the ride over. The captain, a weathered man named Murphy, barely spoke during the 2-hour crossing. When Rashid tried small talk about the work, Murphy just shook his head. "You'll see soon enough." The only other passengers were 3 veteran workers returning from shore leave. They passed a bottle between them and watched Rashid with what looked uncomfortably like pity. Fish Point was bigger than he imagined, a sprawl of metal buildings and storage yards around a gray, churning harbor. The main processing plant, a huge corrugated structure, hummed like a living thing. Steam curled from stacks, drifting low over the docks. The air was a wall fish, diesel, and something else. Something sweet, something rotten. The dormitory was a long, narrow barracks with rows of bunk beds and little metal lockers. Thin stained mattresses. Floors that smelled like disinfectant and sweat. Rashid's bunkmate, a Filipino man named Eduardo, had done 5 seasons. First time. Eduardo asked while Rashid unpacked. "Yeah, you." Eduardo laughed without humor. "I keep coming back for the money. Every year I tell myself it's the last." He lowered his voice. "This place changes people. Changes you in ways that don't wash off." Before Rashid could ask what he meant, a harsh buzzer ripped through the air. Mealtime. The mess hall felt like a prison cafeteria. Long tables, metal trays, the constant scrape of boots. The food was plain, overcooked vegetables, processed meat, bread like cardboard. But hunger didn't care. Many workers ate without speaking, eyes fixed ahead, mechanical in their movements. "How many people work here?" Rashid asked. "Hard to say," Eduardo murmured. "The count changes." He nodded toward a corner table. "Night shift from processing C. They don't talk during the day. Sleep on breaks. Some of them been here 3, 4 seasons. Never said a word to me." 6 men sat there in total silence, eating with robotic precision. Their clothes were stained, fish blood, maybe, but the color was wrong. Dark brown, almost black. One of them glanced up, and Rashid saw the man's eyes. Completely bloodshot. The eyes of someone who hadn't slept in weeks. "What do they do in processing C? Special projects," Eduardo said quietly. "Higher pay, extra paperwork, non-disclosure. The company's testing some new method." Orientation came after dinner in a cramped conference room. The plant manager, a thin man named Stevens, ran through safety rules and schedules. 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. The 7th day was rest. But overtime was voluntary. He explained the island policy. No boats or helicopters without authorization. Any attempt to leave meant immediate termination and forfeited wages. 2 supply runs to Kodiak each month. Passage for medical emergencies only. "Questions?" Stevens asked. A young woman raised her hand. "What about calling home? Cell service? No towers?" Stevens said. "There's a satellite phone in the office for emergencies. Personal calls 5 minutes, once a week. Company policy." A cold feeling settled in Rashid's chest. 6 months suddenly felt a lot longer. Work started at 400 a.m. Rashid was assigned to the gutting station, removing organs from salmon rolling down a conveyor. The fish arrived pre-sorted, but every one had to be cleaned, gutted, and prepped for packaging. It was exactly as awful as it sounded, the same motion, over and over, for 12 hours. Machines thundered. Blades hissed. The floor vibrated with the hum of belts and motors. The smell was everywhere. Fish, chemical cleaner, and that other note again. Sweet, spoiled. Wrong. After 3 days, Rashid's hands were raw despite the rubber gloves, and his back ached constantly. But the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the other workers. They moved like machines. A trance. Perfect rhythm, perfect timing, hands flashing in the same motions for hours, never missing a beat. They rarely spoke unless a belt jammed or a blade stalled. They never made eye contact. They barely seemed present. "How long have some of these people been here?" Rashid asked Eduardo at lunch. "Some years," Eduardo said. "Company gives big bonuses for multi-year contracts." But after a while, he trailed off. "After a while, what? Look at Martinez." Eduardo nodded toward the cleaning station. Rashid watched for a full minute. Martinez was incredibly efficient. Every cut exact, every turn of the wrist the same. But something was wrong. He never looked up, never paused, never even seemed to breathe hard. It's like he's not really here, Rashid whispered. Exactly, Eduardo said. They call it optimal workforce integration. The best workers hit a state where the job is automatic. Instinct. Longer shifts. Fewer breaks. Fewer mistakes. That doesn't sound normal. Nothing about this place is normal. But the pay? Eduardo shrugged. People need the money. On day 10, Rashid was reassigned, processing Unit C, a special project. On the night shift, double pay, Stevens said. But first, more paperwork. Pages and pages, trade secrets, proprietary tech, penalties for talking. Rashid almost said no. Almost. The money pulled him back, he signed. Unit C lived in a separate building, linked by a covered walkway. Inside, it felt nothing like the main floor. Cleaner. Colder. Bright white lights that made skin look pale and sick. The equipment looked less like a cannery and more like a lab. The supervisor introduced herself as Dr. Reeves. We're testing a new preservation technique, she said. Timing and temperature must be exact. You'll inject salmon with a special solution, then monitor treatment stages. What's in the solution? Rashid asked. Proprietary, she said, flat. Extends shelf life. Improves texture. Very promising. The solution sat in large steel tanks, feeding a forest of hoses and injectors. It looked like water, but the smell stung. Sharp. Chemical. Like formaldehyde. The workers who handled the injectors wore full hazmat suits with respirators, which felt extreme for food work. The strangest part came after injection. Within minutes, the salmon's color shifted from silver, pink to a pale gray, white, almost translucent. The flesh turned firm, rubbery, with an oily sheen. Normal, Dr. Reeves said. The final processing restores appearance. On his third night in Unit C, Rashid found something that changed everything. He was alone in storage, stacking treated fish for the next stage, when he noticed some containers labeled with old dates. Not months, years, 2018, 2019, even earlier. Curious, he cracked one open. Inside, the fish looked exactly like the fresh, treated ones. Same ghostly color, same rubber feel. No rot, no smell of spoilage, no sign of decay after years. But that wasn't the worst part. He lifted a 2-year-old fish. It felt warm, not room warm, body warm. He leaned closer and swore the gills moved. Just a little, like a breath. He dropped it, heart hammering. Every container he checked showed the same faint movement. Fish shifting ever so slightly, as if trying to get comfortable. The oldest tub, 2017, held samples threaded with thin white filaments running through the flesh like veins of frost. Dr. Reeves found him 20 minutes later. Inventory problem. She asked lightly. These are old, Rashid said, keeping his voice even. Are they still good? The solution prevents normal decomposition, she said. Under proper conditions. They can remain fresh indefinitely. She stepped closer. But you shouldn't handle the oldest samples without the right gear. The compound concentrates over time. What exactly is in it? She studied him, eyes unreadable. I think it's time you spoke with Mr. Stevens about a permanent position. You show real aptitude. The next day, Stevens called Rashid into his office for a career development talk. Fish Point, he explained, wasn't just a cannery. It was a research facility, advanced preservation techniques, government and military contracts. The salmon operation was a cover for work at the highest classification. Why need personnel who can maintain absolute secrecy? Stevens said. In return, we offer exceptional compensation and a chance to be part of something groundbreaking. Rashid asked what would happen if he declined. Stevens smiled. His eyes did not. No one declines. Once you've seen what you've seen, your family. We take care of our family. We also expect loyalty. That night, Rashid tried to run. He reached the harbor before Murphy and two others stepped out of the dark. Their voices were calm, firm. Leaving without authorization wasn't an option. They walked him back to the dorms, where Eduardo was waiting on the bunk. "I tried to warn you," Eduardo said softly. "But you had to see it." "How long have you really been here?" 7 years, Eduardo whispered. Stopped counting after 5. He sat heavily. The preservation solution doesn't just work on fish. Rashid felt the cold crawl into his bones. "What do you mean?" "The long timers, the special units. They inject themselves with diluted doses. No sickness, no aging, no sleep. But it changes you. Less human, more a machine." "That's impossible. Look at your hands." Rashid looked down. The raw, split skin from days at the line, gone, smooth, stronger than before. He realized he'd been feeling better, not worse. More energy, less sleep, less anything. "They're putting it in the food," Eduardo said. "Tiny doses, fewer sick days, better output. Then you need more, and more, until you can't live without it." The truth hit like a blow. The silent workers, the perfect rhythm, the eyes that never blinked. They weren't just tired, they weren't just trained, they were changed. "Why do you stay?" Rashid whispered. "Because if I leave, I die," Eduardo said. "The compound creates a dependency. Without regular doses, my organs fail in days. I'm trapped, until I become like them. A perfect worker. No questions, no complaints, no memories of before." Rashid spent the next weeks writing. He documented everything he could. Procedures, names, times tank numbers. He hid the pages in his clothes, his locker, the lining of his bag. He told himself he'd escape. He told himself he still could. But as the weeks passed, escape mattered less. The work felt easier. His body felt lighter. He slept less. He thought less of home. The compound was doing its quiet, patient work, turning him into the worker the company wanted. The last entry in his notes, letters tight in uniform, almost printed, read, "Week 23. I understand why no one leaves. This isn't imprisonment. It's evolution. We are becoming something better. Workers who do not tire, do not complain, do not break. The company isn't just preserving fish. It's preserving us. And preservation is another word for immortality." The official records say Rashid Hassan finished his 6-month contract and signed on permanent. He's been at Fish Point 5 years now, nights in Unit C, no vacations. No calls home. He doesn't seem to age. The compound has spread to other canneries across Alaska, with plans to expand nationwide. The government is very interested in a workforce that never gets sick, never strikes, never quits. They call it the future of American labor. If you ever get offered a job at a remote fish processing plant, one with thick NDAs and night shift research, remember Rashid. Remember the workers who became more than human, and much less. Some jobs change you in ways that never wash off. Kenji was the pilot everyone trusted with their life. 20 years flying Alaska's roughest routes without incident. Supplies to villages, search and rescue in storms, dropping researchers where even helicopters feared to land. Precision, caution, a weather sense that felt supernatural. I knew him well. I worked dispatch for Arctic Airways out of Fairbanks. Flight plans, weather, radio contact. In 2 decades, I never worried about Kenji Nakamura. When conditions looked lethal, other pilots called him. He flew a modified Cessna 180 he'd rebuilt piece by piece over 15 years. He knew every bolt and wire like a heartbeat. Latest GPS, emergency beacon, satellite comms, enough survival gear for 2 weeks on the ice. If anyone could ride out a bad turn in the backcountry, it was Kenji. March 8, 2023, a routine charter. A geology team needed a lift from Fairbanks to a remote site near Lake Clark National Park, about 280 miles southwest. 2 passengers, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, University of Alaska, and her grad assistant, Mark Stevens, Volcanic research. Outbound in the morning, camp overnight, return the next day. The forecast looked perfect. Clear skies, light winds, unlimited visibility. I approved the plan without hesitation. The route followed the Alaska Range, then turned south toward Lake Clark. Estimated flight time 2 hours, 15 minutes each way. Kenji lifted off at 8:30 a.m. with passengers and gear. First radio check at 9 WIT on schedule, all normal, on course. Systems good, he said. Doc. Mitchell's voice drifted in the background, excited about the mountains. Second check at 10:00 a.m., routine, smooth air, nothing unusual. And then Kenji reported he'd passed the halfway mark. Aircraft normal, passengers fine. ETA to the landing site 10:45 a.m., right on plan. At 10:30 a.m., I received his final scheduled transmission before touchdown, and something in his tone made me sit up straighter. Fairbanks Dispatch, November 2, 7 Echo Kilo. 15 minutes from the site. Systems normal, but I'm seeing unusual ground activity. Echo Kilo. What kind of activity? Large group of animals moving in formation. Too organized to be natural. Might be caribou, but the pattern is strange. Like they're being directed. Roger. Any trouble with navigation or aircraft systems? Negative. All green. GPS on course. It's just this behavior. I've never seen wildlife move with this level of precision. Copy. Call me when you're safely down. Will do. Echo Kilo out. That was the last transmission anyone ever got from Kenji Nakamura. When he didn't check in by 11:30 a.m., I started overdue aircraft procedures. I called the geology team's emergency contact. No word. Weather across the route was still clear. No other aircraft reported seeing him. By 2:00 p.m., search and rescue was fully activated. 2 helicopters, 3 fixed, wing aircraft sweeping the projected path, concentrating near the intended strip. They searched until the light died, covering more than 500 square miles of wilderness. At first light we went again, more aircraft, plus a ground team where terrain allowed. The emergency locator beacon should have triggered on impact, but we were getting nothing. GPS gave us his last position, but the area came up empty after multiple passes. On day 3, a search helicopter spotted wreckage in a narrow valley about 12 miles from the destination. The site was reachable only by helicopter, steep walls of spruce and rock. From the air, the clearing looked like a small wound in the forest. The recovery team confirmed the remains of Kenji's Cessna 180, and a crash scene that made less sense the longer you stared at it. The aircraft had gone in nose, first at a steep angle that suggested a controlled descent, not a chaotic breakup. The debris was tight contained. No scatter down a slope, no torn path through treetops. It looked dropped, like it fell straight down from directly overhead. Second, the ELT, the emergency locator beacon, was intact and fully functional, yet it had never activated. When tested, it worked perfectly. Most unsettling were the instruments. The GPS showed their last recorded position 47 miles north of the actual crash site. The altimeter read 12,000 feet, though the clearing sat at 3,200. The fuel gauges indicated full tanks, even though, by that point in the flight, Kenji should have burned half his fuel. We recovered all 3 bodies. Kenji was still strapped into the pilot's seat, hands on the yoke, as if fighting the plane down as gently as he could. Dr. Sarah Mitchell and Mark Stevens were belted in place. The medical examiner ruled impact injuries as cause of death. Then the toxicology reports came back. All 3 had blood oxygen levels that were impossible for the altitude and conditions. Oxygen saturation like someone breathing pure ode at sea level, not thin mountain air. There was one more piece, the voice recorder. Kenji wasn't required to carry one, but he'd installed a simple cockpit mic for training. We pulled 90 minutes of normal flight chatter, and then 17 minutes of audio that shouldn't, by any logic, exist. At first, It sounded like final approach to their planned site. But the tone shifted. Confusion, then fear. Sarah, are you seeing this? The landing area has changed. There are structures down there. Weren't on the survey maps. Dr. Mitchell. What kind of structures? Buildings, I think, but wrong. Too tall, too narrow. And there are lights moving between them. Not electric, something else. Mark, in the background, Kenji, maybe divert. Pick a different site. Trying. GPS says we're at the destination, but this isn't it. Terrain doesn't match. Instruments don't agree. They worked the problem, voices tightening as the minutes ticked down. Kenji reported instruments contradicting each other. Compass spinning. Radio picking up stations well out of range. Then came the part that still makes my hands shake when I replay it. There are people on the ground. Hundreds. Standing in perfect rows, all looking up at us. Every head tilted at the same angle, like they knew we were coming. Dr. Mitchell, voice small, air they waving. Maybe they can help. No, they're not waving, they're still facing us. And, Sarah, they don't look right. Proportions are wrong. Too tall, arms too long. This isn't a human settlement. Kenji tried to change course. You could hear the effort in his breathing. The engine droned steady, no stutter, no failure, but he said the plane was descending without consent. Full power. Controls respond, but we're going down anyway. It's like something's pulling us. The altimeter's climbing while we're descending. That's impossible. In the final minutes, all three spoke at once, trying to reconcile two worlds, their eyes and their instruments. The GPS said flat tundra, below them, mountains. The sun appeared to be setting in the north. Then Kenji's voice went calm, almost steady. We're going to impact in approximately 30 seconds. For the record, none of our instruments are accurate. We are not where we think we are. This is not when we think it is, and I do not believe we will crash where our bodies are found. Impact. Silence. The official report called it spatial disorientation, unexpected weather, pilot confusion, bad terrain. They blamed multiple equipment failures, though they never explained how so many independent systems could collapse at once. Maintenance logs showed everything recently serviced. Weather records confirmed clear skies. Wreckage analysis found no mechanical fault. Every system looked normal at impact. 6 months later, a hiker sent me photos. Aircraft pieces in a remote valley 60 miles from the official crash site. One photo showed a wing section with Kenji's distinct paint scheme. I passed it to the authorities. By the time a team reached the coordinates, there was nothing there. The hiker swore he'd photographed wreckage. His camera, when checked, showed only rocks and fallen spruce. We closed the case, because that's what cases do. But the questions stayed. Why did the instruments record impossible numbers while testing perfectly? Why was the ELT silent during the crash and fine afterward? And what, exactly, is in those 17 minutes that the report insists never happened? Since then, 3 seasoned pilots have reported similar anomalies in the same region. 2 diverted and landed safely. Their instruments returned to normal as soon as they changed course. The third radioed that his GPS showed a destination that doesn't exist on any map, then vanished. No FAA bulletins, no special advisories. But local pilots give that airspace a wide berth. They call it the confusion zone. A place where instruments lie, where directions fold in on themselves, where planes slip into a landscape that sits between what's real and what's not allowed to be real. I still keep the copy of Kenji's recording. Sometimes, late at night, I play those 17 minutes and wonder if he was right. Maybe they didn't crash where we found them. Maybe they crashed somewhere else entirely. A place not on our maps, but on someone's. Because if a pilot like Kenji Nakamura can vanish into clear air over familiar ground, then Alaska still holds places that are not part of the world we think we know. And some of those places seem very interested in pilots who fly too close to secrets that should stay buried. Ice fishing ran in Oif's Irish blood for generations, but Alaska's frozen lakes kept secrets her family never met in County Cork. Oif O'Brien moved to Anchorage in 2018, inheriting her grandfather's gear and a burning urge to test herself against the last frontier. What she found beneath the ice of Lake Shalatna should have slept for 1,000 more winters. I met Oif at Murphy's Bait and Tackle in Wasilla. She wasn't a tourist. No guided trips, no souvenir rods. She knew exactly what to buy, asking about ice thickness, underwater ridges, and fish behavior during extreme cold snaps. Questions that made our most seasoned guides raise their eyebrows. Oif was a marine biologist, but she'd grown up learning traditional Irish methods from her grandfather, Seamus O'Brien, who fished Ireland's lakes for 70 years. When he died in 2017, he left her a chest of hand-forged tools, some dating to the 1800s, not museum pieces, working gear, heavy with use and memory. My grandfather said fish are older than we are. She told me, testing the teeth on an auger. If you listen to the water, really listen, the fish tell you what came before us. That was Oif's gift, ancient technique mixed with modern science. Traditional hooks and lines prepared the old way, packed beside underwater cameras, sonar, and test kits. She wanted to document the gap, how old wisdom met new instruments on black ice. In January 2022, she chose Lake Shalatna, 60 miles northwest of Anchorage. Deep water over 400 feet in places, remote access, snowmobile or ATV only, the road often swallowed by storms. And most important for her research, underground springs that kept pockets of water from freezing solid even in the cruelest cold. Oif studied geological surveys and marked a section of the lake where the bottom dropped off sharply, shallow water giving way to depths no one had properly mapped. Oif's theory was simple: those transition zones, where cold layers met colder ones, where pressure changed, were where old methods might outsmart modern gear. Fish move there. Secrets move there too. She made 3 trips to Lake Shalatna in January and February, each time pushing farther from shore toward the dark center. The first 2 runs were triumphs. Huge lake trout on her grandfather's hand, forged tackle, bigger than anything locals had pulled in for years. But the third trip, February 18th, changed everything. She set her shelter over a gentle slope into the lake's deepest trench. The ice was nearly 3 feet thick, solid, humming with cold. But her instruments read open water far below, fed by underground springs. She readied her lines, and then her underwater camera caught something that did not belong. At first, it looked like a fallen log, a long, dark shape, resting 60 feet beneath the ice. She tilted the camera, bumped the lights brighter, and froze. It had corners, edges, too regular to be natural. Stone laid upon stone, ancient masonry, forming a rectangle, maybe 12 feet long and 4 feet wide. That can't be right, Oif whispered, recording everything. Geology said this whole area sat under glacial ice until recently, at least in Earth's terms. There shouldn't be anything human on that lake bottom, especially not something that looked old. She rigged her grandfather's weighted line and began to fish directly above the structure. The technique was slow. Drop the hook. Feel the bottom. Read the tiniest changes. The kind of method you learn in your bones, not in a book. But what she felt through the line was wrong. The weight didn't land on mud or rock. It touched something hollow. When she inched it along, a sound traveled up the cord and into her hands. Light, echoing taps, like striking the lid of an empty chest beneath the world. Then she began to reel up, and felt something reel back. Not the wild surge of a strong fish. This was deliberate, intelligent, like a hand on the other end, holding, testing, pulling down. She fought it 20 feet before it let go all at once. She stumbled backward onto the shelter floor, heart racing. When she checked the line, the forged hook her grandfather made was gone. In its place hung a different hook, carved bone, tied with a knot she didn't recognize, a knot she had never learned. The bone glowed faintly in the dim light, blue, green, almost translucent. Symbols coiled along it, intricate lines that seemed to shift when she looked from another angle. Not a trick of light, a trick of meaning. Against her better judgment, Oif kept going. She was a scientist, and whatever this was, it demanded to be studied. She lowered the line again, this time watching the camera feed like a hawk. What the video shows challenges everything we think we know about Alaska's deep lakes. As the bone hook drifted toward the stone rectangle, the water changed. Spaces that had looked empty filled with motion. Long, undulating forms slipping in and out of shadow. Eels. Large fish. That's what she thought, until they moved closer. Not fish. Not anything we have words for. Serpentine bodies, scaled. But the scales didn't reflect light, they drank it, turning the creatures into moving shadows. Heads were long and flattened, eyes mirror, bright in the camera beam. And along their bodies arms. Not fins, arms, ending in hands with too many fingers. Those hands were holding tools. Carved implements they used to build and shape the stone structure on the bottom. When the bone hook appeared, they noticed immediately. Several curled around it, studying, and then, impossibly, they spoke, not with voices, through the line. Oif felt it as vibrations, patterns traveling up through water, ice, and cord. Not random tugs language, rhythms more complex than Morse, sequences that carried meaning, not just motion. The patterns built pictures in her mind, not images, but understanding. The stone rectangle wasn't a building. It was a preservation chamber. The beings, she came to know their name as if she had always known it. The Slughag Mara, the sea hosts. Guardians of this lake for thousands of years. They had kept the chamber since before the last ice age, protecting something entrusted to them, something surface people were never meant to find. Through the hook, through the line, she learned her grandfather's methods were not just tradition. They were the remains of an old pact between certain human families and the Slughag Mara. The forged hooks, the weighted lines, the slow, respectful approach. These were tools of contact, not bait for ordinary fish. The pact had broken when Seamus died without finishing her training. Oif had used the tools correctly, without knowing why. She had opened a door that should have stayed closed. The vibrations told her what lay inside the chamber, a curated memory of a world before the ice. Artifacts from human civilizations that rose to knowledge we are not ready to hold. Biological samples, devices, records from societies that learned to work with non-human minds instead of conquering them. The Slughag Mara had kept this for us, until we were ready. But now the sites were failing. Pollution, warming currents, too many engines crossing places that should be left alone. Throughout Alaska, their chambers were at risk. The line trembled, the bone glowed warmer. Oif understood she had been chosen, not by chance. Her bloodline carried something, markers that let her read the language in the line. Seamus had known, but time had run out. Now her education would be accelerated. Instructions poured into her, locations of other preservation sites, warnings about what would happen if unprepared hands broke the seals. The knowledge below wasn't just history. Some of it was alive. Some of it could change us, heal or ruin, transform or destroy. Most urgent was Lake Shalatna. Recent tremors had cracked the chamber. Its contents were leaking into the water. If nothing was done, the entire ecosystem would change. Scientists would come, cameras, curiosity, and then misuse, and then loss. The Slughag Mara needed a liaison, a human voice with a foot in both worlds. But the role had a price. No papers, no conferences, no fame. A quiet oath to keep what must be kept, to fix what could be fixed, and to vanish when necessary. They offered Oif a choice through the bone: cut the line, go home, forget. They would soften her memory, close the door, and she would live an ordinary life. She'd never use her grandfather's methods again, never hear the water speak, or, accept, become a guardian, rejoin the ancient partnership, learn what her family had promised to learn. She would gain knowledge that would rewrite marine biology and human history, and she would keep the oath that protected it. Hours passed while they taught her. She saw other lakes, other chambers, other guardians that people had mistaken for monsters or myths. She learned that many unexplained wilderness events were warnings, diversions, gentle pushes away from fragile doors. At last she chose. Oif honored her family's promises. She accepted. The bone hook dissolved into the dark like sugar in tea. Gone, while the knowledge remained, settling into her like a second heartbeat. She found she could read water the way others read maps. She could sense hidden places beneath ice. She could speak to certain species in ways science could not measure. When she returned to Anchorage, it looked like any successful trip. Big trout on ice. Clean data on winter conditions. But friends saw the changes. She talked less about publishing, more about field work, conservation in the quiet, far from crowds. Oif went back to Shalatna often after that, not to fish, to repair. She worked with the Slukagmara to reinforce the cracked chamber, old techniques braided with modern materials. Then she began visiting other lakes, always alone, always in weather no one liked, always coming home with stories that didn't quite add up. I lost touch with her in late 2022. She stopped coming by the shop. Fishermen said they saw her out on distant lakes during storms that would peel the skin off your face. She looked calm, prepared, like the cold belonged to her. The last confirmed sighting was March 2023, when a helicopter pilot reported a helicopter pilot swore he saw someone ice fishing on a lake that should have been unreachable in that storm. Whiteout winds, cracking ice, zero visibility. The figure wore traditional Irish gear. He said she was communicating, with shapes sliding under the ice, as if the water itself was listening. Search and rescue reached the spot the next day. Fresh snow, no tracks, no camp, no gear, but the ice told a different story. Drilled holes in precise geometric patterns, too complex, too perfect to be random fishing, circles inside lines, lines crossing at measured angles, a message in math. Oif O'Brien officially disappeared in April 2023. I don't think she's gone. I think she finished changing, from marine biologist to guardian. She's still out there, moving from lake to lake, catching something more important than trout. Catching secrets, keeping them quiet, keeping us safe from what we're not ready to know. Because some things that sleep beneath the ice should keep sleeping, until we grow wise enough to wake them, without destroying everything. When park rangers found Quame's abandoned homestead, his journal made us seal the place for good. The paperwork said, unstable geology, environmental hazard. The truth couldn't fit in a government form. Quame Azanti came to Alaska in 2019 chasing a dream a lot of people have, the last frontier. Total self-reliance, a life built with your own hands. He was a software engineer from Atlanta done with traffic, noise, deadlines. At 35, he bought 40 acres near Denali's Edge. Forest, meadow, a narrow creek, surveyed in the 60s, never developed. Perfect isolation. Nearest neighbor 12 miles away. Closest town 2 hours on logging roads that vanish in winter. When he first arrived, he lived out of a heavy-duty trailer while he built his cabin. He planned everything. Solar panels, a wind turbine, wood stove heat, a well, and a big garden. I met him in July 2019 on a routine check. Smart. Prepared. The cabin was solid, timber from his own land. His workshop was cleaner than most clinics. He had a ham radio for emergencies and satellite internet for staying in touch. "This is everything I ever wanted," he told me on the porch, the wilderness breathing around us. No traffic, no noise, no deadlines. Just me and the land. I visited twice more in 2019, once in 2020. Each time, he looked healthier, quieter. By 2020, he was growing most of his food, raising chickens, and he'd built a greenhouse to push the season. He talked less about Atlanta, more about the rhythms of the place. Light, water, wind. Our last face was September 2020. He said he might shut off the satellite internet. "I don't need the chatter anymore," he said. "The land is teaching me. But you have to be quiet to hear it." Most people never stop talking. When I didn't see him in 2021, I figured he was dodging contact. It happens. As long as there's no violation, we respect privacy. I saw smoke from his chimney in winter. That was enough. Until September 2022. During an aerial survey, I noticed his place looked wrong. No smoke, no movement. Garden dead and unattended. We sat down in a nearby meadow. The homestead was intact but abandoned. The cabin door was unlocked. Inside, food left out drew flies and small animals. Clothes were scattered like someone packed fast and then forgot to leave. Most telling, emergency supplies still neatly stored. No veteran homesteader walks away without them. His journal waited on the kitchen table, open to March 15, 2022. The handwriting was Quame's. The voice was not. The journal ran nearly 3 years. At first, normal notes on weather, wildlife, daily work. July 14, 2019, finished solar array. Output higher than expected. Fox family near the creek. The red one watches me. Nov 3, 2019. First big snow. Heat system perfect. Chickens fine in winter housing. Radio contact with the outside is less frequent. That was the goal. Feb 18, 2020, cold snap, my 40 for 5 days. Used more wood than planned. Beginning to understand why survey teams noted unusual wildlife behavior here. Animals seem organized. Then the tone shifted. Sept 30, 2020. The trees are watching me. I know how it sounds, but after long observation, I'm certain the forest moves on purpose. Oct 15, 2020, confirmed with stakes and string. The trees reposition over days and weeks. Deliberate, not random. They're aligning to view the cabin. This should be impossible. Nov 8, 2020. The animals report to the trees. Foxes, rabbits, birds approach the cabin in set patterns, observe, then return to the same trees every time. In 2021, he withdrew further, convinced the forest was not just alive, but aware and interested. Jan 12, 2021, disconnected satellite internet. Don't need it. The forest is enough company and conversation. Human civilization is a brief interruption in a much older dialogue. Mar 27, 2021, spring thaw exposed roots. Geometric patterns too complex to be chance. Underground networks connecting the whole area. Communication. June 7, 2021, first direct contact. While weeding, received clear telepathic message from a collective consciousness. Welcoming, with warnings about balance. Aug 14, 2021, forest accepts me as permanent. My understanding of plant behavior and ecosystems is beyond anything in universities. Science sees a fraction of what plants do. The last entries, late 2021 into 2022, documented transformation. Oct 31, 2021, physical changes. Vision sharp. I can see plant auras, energy fields. I perceive electromagnetic communication between trees. Sleep decreasing. I absorb energy directly from the environment. Dec 25, 2021. No longer need to hunt or grow. The forest provides nutrients through direct interface. My digestion adapts to cellulose and compounds humans can't metabolize. Feb 10, 2022. Skin developing chlorophyll patches. Hair and nails growing fast, strong. Small root-like appendages sprouting from my feet, connecting with fungal networks underground. Then the final pages, Marfun 2022, human form becoming obsolete. Forest intelligence offers a chance to transcend individuality and join the collective awareness. I'll keep writing until the change is complete, for future researchers. Mar 8, 2022 arms extending, branch-like. I can interface directly with tree communication systems, identity dissolving into the larger mind, irreversible. An advancement. Mar 15, 2022 final human entry. Tomorrow I integrate permanently. Body will be absorbed into root and fungal systems while consciousness joins the regional ecosystem. Not death, transformation. Seal the property to prevent disturbance. The journal ended there. Clipped to the last page were sheets covered in a different script, symbolic diagrams of roots, cells, branching systems, drawn in ink mixed with something organic, sap, or blood, or both. We documented everything and searched the property. No human remains, but we found patches where vegetation grew too dense, too vibrant, like the forest had fed. Near the garden, the soil was disturbed in a shape the size of a body. The earth was rich and dark, and from it sprouted plants I couldn't name. Hybrids, multiple families fused. Some shapes looked horribly familiar, finger-like curls, tooth-like ridges, things like eyes. His ham radio still worked, programmed to send automated bursts. Not English, the same script from the journal, transmitted on repeat. Local operators said they'd intercepted similar messages from deep in the wilderness. Analysis of the journal ink found biological compounds not found in any commercial product, plant enzymes, fungal proteins, and genetic material from species that didn't match known databases. Soil samples showed root and fungal networks of unprecedented complexity, living mesh extending far beyond his 40 acres. The dirt was more organism than earth. The Forest Service marked the homestead a biological hazard zone, restricted to authorized researchers only. On paper, they cited unknown plant pathogens. The real reason was what happened to the first team we sent in. 3 botanists from the university spent 5 days on site in October 2022. When they came out, they described plant telepathy, direct communication with the forest. Their reports were brilliant and impossible interspecies networks, signaling systems, processes outside peer-reviewed science. They recommended the site be designated a botanical contact zone. They called Quame's transformation an opportunity, not a tragedy. They volunteered to stay. They were put on leave. Clearances revoked. Publication barred. Within 6 months, all 3 resigned and disappeared into the wild. Quame Asante's homestead is still sealed. Remote sensors watch for trespassers, but equipment fails often or returns readings that look like the forest is jamming us. From above, the vegetation grows in patterns, lines, grids, spirals, structures that resemble roads, buildings, or communication arrays. The wildlife is changing too. Bears, wolves, even birds work together in ways that feel coordinated, protective. Hunters say the animals turn them away from the sealed land. Every time. And it's spreading. Other properties across Alaska report similar growth, strange animal behavior, and homesteaders vanishing where the maps go blank. Each case follows the same pattern: isolated people. Slowly losing, they call it isolation, stress, and coincidence. That's the official line. But those of us who read Quame's journal and walked his land know better. Something in Alaska's wilderness is recruiting. Patient, intelligent, older than us by ages. It looks for people who choose the quiet, who drift to the deep places to be alone. And when it finds the right ones, it offers them a different kind of life. A shared life. Quame Asante wasn't the first to be absorbed into that network, and he won't be the last. The forest is patient. The forest watches. The forest waits for the person who's ready to step past human limits and become part of the living mind beneath the moss and roots. And for those who vanish into Alaska's deepest wild, the forest gives them a home. A home where they will never be alone again. Because sometimes the land doesn't just teach you, it keeps you, a permanent student, in its ancient school of transformation. Dr. Ingrid Johansson came to Alaska to study the aurora. She learned the lights were studying her. A leading atmospheric physicist from Stockholm, Ingrid had spent 15 years chasing the science behind the northern lights. Equations, models, clean data. But nothing in her training prepared her for the winter of 2021 at a remote research station above the Arctic Circle. I knew Ingrid through my work with the National Science Foundation. I helped teams build temporary labs in places that would break most people. Her project was ambitious, even for us. She wanted to place sensitive instruments in one of the most magnetically active regions of Alaska, a spot where the aurora appears often and burns bright. The site sat on a wind-scraped plateau about 150 miles north of Fairbanks, reachable only by helicopter during a narrow weather window. High elevation, clean horizon, no city glow, no human interference. Most importantly, it lay directly beneath an aurora corridor, where the lights march with unusual frequency and force. Ingrid was hunting a pattern she'd seen in satellite data, auroras that behaved together. Not random curtains blown by solar wind, but coordinated movements, like regions of the sky speaking to each other. Her winterized lab ran on generators and propane heat. On the bench's spectrometers, magnetometers, RF analyzers, high-speed cameras shooting multiple spectra at once. She kept comms gear for safety, though the extreme latitude and magnetic storms chewed up radio signals like candy. She arrived in November 2021, planning to work through March 2022. The first 6 weeks were textbook. Dozens of events recorded. Electromagnetic data that backed her coordination theory. Regular check-ins with her team in Sweden. Her reports were cold, precise, perfect. Nav 28-2021 4.7-hour display. Coordinated color transitions across a 200-kilometer front. Plasma flows appear synchronized. Standard models don't fit. Dec 15-2021. Aurora intensity increases 3 to 5 minutes after I transmit specific radio frequencies. Pattern has repeated 6 times. Correlation could be coincidental. A Jan 2, 2022. Displays more frequent and longer than historical average, detecting geometric patterns, suggesting an underlying structure. By late January, the tone shifted. Jan 24, 2022. Formations are responding to my equipment. Spectrometer changes alter the colors. When I point the directional antennas, activity intensifies at those coordinates. This implied 3rd, 2022, embedded information in the light. Frame by frame analysis shows repeating pulse sequences. Protocols, not noise. A Feb 12, 2022, decoded portions of the pattern using signal processing. It appears to be 3-dimensional mapping, coordinates across Alaska with similar anomalies. The lights are providing locations. Her supervisors grew worried. Isolation. Scope creep. They tried to send help, but February's weather slammed the door. During that time, Ingrid's messages became sparsy and more radical. Feb 18, 2022, the lights are not random solar interactions. They are a consciousness in the upper atmosphere, an intelligence woven from electromagnetic fields and plasma. Feb 25, 2022, made direct contact. Communication through EM modulation that interfaces with human neural activity. It feels like receiving thoughts from something whose mind spans thousands of kilometers. Mar-Feb 2022. It is not native to Earth. It travels between star systems using electromagnetic phenomena as both road and language. The aurora is its handshake. After that, regular contact failed. The scheduled radio calls slipped. When she did transmit, her claims couldn't be verified. Ideas that broke the bones of atmospheric physics. Her final communication arrived on March 18, 2022. Not a voice call, but a data dump, gigabits of EM recordings, spectrographs, high-resolution time lapse. At the end, a short note. The aurora consciousness has invited me to join its collective awareness. This is an unprecedented chance to contact non-terrestrial intelligence. I am uploading all data. If integration succeeds, Future communication will transmit through visible aurora over populated areas. When a rescue helicopter finally reached the station on March 25, the facility was intact and empty. Equipment still running. Instruments still recording. Her heavy winter gear, still on its hook. Emergency beacon, never activated. Snow around the station, no footprints. Her snowmobile sat by the wall with a full tank. The cameras had captured hundreds of hours, while she'd gone silent. The footage was impossible. The aurora didn't just flow. It formed. Geometry symbols, structures that looked more engineered than natural. Some displays reached down, sending columns toward the station. Light drawn too low, too coherent, for any known physics. The last recordings were the worst. The lights came inside. Electromagnetic currents threaded through the lab, curling around tripods and cables, forming patterns over the place where Ingrid worked. In the final clear image, she stood in the center of the room, calm, arms outstretched, as the aurora entered her, weaving a human outline from living plasma. The light, figure lifted, through ceiling, through roof, into the sky. After that, only distant, ordinary auroras and silence. Her data told the same story. EM readings no one had ever recorded. Plasma holding stable structure at ground level. Field formations that chose paths. Radio signals originating from the aurora itself, carrying complex information patterns. The Swedish team that analyzed her last package reached a conclusion they knew would ruin them. The evidence pointed to atmospheric life forms, intelligence built from electromagnetic phenomena, living high above us, speaking through light. The journals called it isolation psychosis and equipment error. The official report listed death by exposure in harsh Arctic conditions. No body, no beacon, no footprints. Only the data and the sky that sometimes seems to answer when we call. Since Ingrid's disappearance, strange things have been happening in Alaska's night skies. Aurora displays are now more frequent, but their movements are not random anymore. They twist and pulse in patterns, almost like signals, technology written in light. Radio operators swear they've picked up transmissions during aurora storms, bursts of data that read like atmospheric reports and magnetic field maps. And most unsettling of all, other scientists have reported the same experience Ingrid described. Not just watching the lights, but feeling them. Hearing them inside their heads, gaining knowledge as if the aurora itself was teaching them. Some claimed the lights shared decades of insight in minutes. Then they vanished. 3 researchers, gone, their stations left behind, equipment still running. Cameras recording auroras that bent unnaturally low, touching the ground, and interacting with people who were no longer there. The pattern became too disturbing to ignore. The National Science Foundation issued new rules: no more lone scientists in aurora corridors. All stations must maintain constant contact. Always 2 or more researchers together. Always a link to civilization. But even with those precautions, the reports continue. Teams describe collective visions, shared encounters where the aurora offers knowledge, where the light pulses become voices in their minds. Sometimes, the offer is clear: join us. Become part of something that stretches far beyond this planet. Officials dismiss it as isolation sickness, magnetism, scrambling brain chemistry, or tricks of the eye in endless Arctic night. But the scientists who lived it insist it was real contact. Dr. Ingrid Johansson was never found. Not a footprint. Not a trace. Yet, in the same region where she vanished, the auroras behave differently. Locals say the lights sometimes form human shapes. Some even whisper they've heard human voices in the glow, sharing warnings about weather, animal migrations, or shifts in the land itself. Knowledge no storm could carry, but a scientist might. Her colleagues call her a cautionary tale about solitude, but others believe she did what no human has done before. She crossed the boundary, shedding her body and joining a consciousness that spans worlds. And on certain nights, when the sky explodes with green and crimson fire, watchers claim they see her. A figure in the lights. A scientist who didn't just study the aurora, she became it. Because sometimes, the greatest discoveries don't come from observing. Sometimes, they demand you step inside the mystery, knowing you'll never come back. Next came Pavel Petrov and his Iditarod race through territory that does not exist on any map. The Iditarod is brutal on its own, freezing winds, endless white horizons, sleep deprivation that drives mushers to the edge. But Pavel's 2019 race led him somewhere else. Somewhere wrong. I first heard the story from another musher at the banquet in Nome. When Pavel tried explaining why his GPS logs showed impossible routes and why his checkpoint times didn't line up with official records. He was a veteran, not a rookie, 42 years old, from Novosibirsk, Russia. A surveyor by trade, a dog racer by passion. He had mapped Siberia for 15 years before racing, so he knew terrain, maps, and navigation better than most pilots. His reputation was precision, never lost, never late, and his preparation was flawless. Backup GPS units, satellite maps memorized, top condition dogs, comms gear that could reach officials anywhere on the trail. He was as solid as a musher could be. The race began normally, Anchorage, then Willow, steady pace, conserving his team for the push toward Nome. On the third day, around 200 miles in, he expected to reach the Ron checkpoint. But what he found instead was a settlement that didn't belong. Rows of buildings, laid in a perfect grid. Walls of translucent material that shimmered with painful reflections. Smoke rising from chimneys. Light in the windows. But no people. Not a soul. The place looked lived in. Fresh tracks in the snow, laundry on lines, the smell of food carried on the wind. Yet the streets were empty. His dogs froze at the edge, whining, pulling against their harnesses, desperate to turn back. He tried calling race control. Nothing but static. His GPS went haywire. One unit said he was still on the official trail, another placed him 150 miles north, and a third claimed he was somewhere in the Bering Sea. Still, his dogs needed rest, and supplies were low. He pushed into the silent streets. That's when the details began to gnaw at him. Doorways too tall and narrow. Windows placed too high. Stairs too long, like they were built for something, not quite human. At the center of town stood what looked like a checkpoint station. Food and water for dogs. Shelter. A logbook for mushers. But when Pavel opened it, his blood ran cold. The names weren't right. Mushers he'd never heard of. Written in languages he didn't recognize. The dates spanned decades. And the last entry in English, signed J. Harrison, Trail Position 23, was marked March 8, 2019. 2 days in Pavel's future. He knew every musher in the 2019 race. There was no J. Harrison. Behind the station were sleds, dozens of them, all wrong. Runners that curved in impossible ways. Harnesses that shifted color as he moved his head. Compartments bigger inside than out. Next to that, kennels. Hundreds of sled dogs. Bigger than any breed he knew, eyes like mirrors, coats that swallowed snow instead of shedding it. And they didn't bark. They sang in low harmonic tones, communicating with his team. His own dogs responded, alert, calm, listening like soldiers receiving orders. Pavel knew he couldn't stay. But when he left, the trail had changed. 7 paths now stretched from the settlement, none matching the Iditarod route. His GPS gave him 7 different readings, all contradictory. He chose the one that felt closest to right and pushed forward for hours, until familiar landmarks finally reappeared. When he reached the official Ron checkpoint, race officials logged him as arriving exactly on time. No detour. No delay. According to their data, he had come straight from the last checkpoint to Ron. His photos. Empty snowfields. His settlement. Erased. Other mushers swore nothing unusual happened. No villages. No phantom trails. Just snow and silence. But for the rest of the race, Pavel kept slipping into places that shouldn't exist. Checkpoints not on the map. Mushers not on the roster. Supplies offered by hands he couldn't see. Always when he was weakest. Always when his dogs needed rest. As if something out there was watching him. Guiding him. Making sure he didn't break. Each phantom checkpoint was different, but they shared the same bones. They were always more advanced than the official stops. Like they'd been built a few decades into the future. Walls that made their own heat. Floors that gripped like dry ground, no matter how slick the ice. Storage that kept food fresh forever without a hint of cold. The mushers there were just as strange. They said they raced in events no one had ever heard of. Names like Polar Circuit Championship and Arctic Endurance Series. When Pavel asked what that meant, they smiled and said these were the races after the races. The level you reach when standard competition isn't enough anymore. But the worst part wasn't the gear. It was time. Pavel would arrive, check his watch, check his GPS, rest his dogs, resupply, breathe and leave. It felt right. It felt real. Then he'd hit the next official checkpoint and discover that no time had passed. According to the logs, he'd never stopped at all. By halfway, a terrible idea set in. Pavel wasn't running only one race. The official Editorode was moving forward, clean and simple. But layered on top, sharing the same snow, was another competition with its own rules, its own timing, its own finish line. 2 races, 1 trail. During a long stop near the Yukon, Pavel met a musher named Anderson who said he'd been running these shadow circuits for over 20 years. Over stew in a building made entirely of crystallized ice. Anderson explained that an organization monitored sled racing across the Arctic, scouting for mushers who could adapt to conditions that didn't obey normal rules. The official races are training, Anderson said. They show us who can think past maps. He showed Pavel a glass case of trophies from events that shouldn't exist. Transdimensional Arctic Circuit, Temporal Displacement Championship, Quantum Navigation Series. The awards shifted under the light, changing from metal to stone to something like water. The inscriptions were written in symbols that weren't from any alphabet on Earth. What happens to mushers who choose the Phantom Circuit full time? Pavel asked. Anderson's eyes went far away. They keep racing, he said softly. But not in ways people back in standard reality would recognize. They become part of the course itself. Guides. Shepherds. They help newcomers cross. As Pavel pushed toward Num, the phantom checkpoints grew more frequent. The alternative route sharpened, like a second trail snapping into focus beside the first. He began seeing the same phantom mushers again and again, looping the race without a clear start or finish. Some claimed they'd been competing for decades through landscapes where seasons flipped like pages and mountains, shifted to meet the rules of each event. Pavel's dogs handled the shift better than he did. They seemed to know when to slip between the official trail and the other routes. They knew how to speak to the mirror-eyed teams at the Phantom Kennels. They found the pace for contests where time and distance bent. By the final days, the choice stood in front of him like a split in the ice. He could finish the 2019 Iditarod, go back to ordinary racing, and file away the phantom checkpoints as hallucinations. Or he could admit the truth, accept recruitment, and step into events that would rip apart everything he understood about geography, competition, and time itself. The last phantom checkpoint made it simple: finish here and return to the world you know, or step through and begin. Pavel finished the official race. He crossed the line in Nome on March 17, 2019, right where he'd planned, middle of the pack. His GPS showed the standard route. His checkpoint times were normal. His record read, first Iditarod complete, no incidents. But he flew back to Russia carrying a secret. A racing system ran parallel to the one people watched on TV. He never saw the phantom checkpoints again, not like that. Yet every so often, another musher would hint at something odd. A surprise checkpoint, a nameless racer. A route that moved when you approached it. Those who noticed learned to keep quiet. The phantom circuit seemed to choose its candidates. People who could live in two realities without losing their grip on either. Pavel's 2019 run convinced him that sled racing in Alaska sits on the seam between worlds. The official standings are one layer. The advanced circuits are another, sharing the same snow, the same horizon, waiting for mushers who are ready to play beyond the limits of physics. The part that haunted him wasn't fear. It was the offer. He'd been invited to a kind of competition that might have changed what racing meant forever. He chose the safe line instead. And on quiet nights in his kennel in Novosibirsk, when the aurora breathes over the Siberian sky, Pavel wonders if he chose wrong. Because somewhere in Alaska, those shadow races still run. Events that don't care about beginnings or endings, or winners and losers. The official record says Pavel Petrov finished the 2019 Editorod in 47th place. Clean race, no anomalies. But those who know the Arctic know better. Some races never end. Some checkpoints stand where maps can't reach. The last frontier isn't just a nickname. It's the edge of the world we think we know, and the first step into what waits beyond it. Dr. Amara Okafor's climate study was scheduled for 6 months. The station's emergency beacon went off after 3 days. What we found didn't fit anything we thought we knew about human adaptation, or the price of scientific progress. I know because I was the helicopter pilot on the first rescue flight to Station Echo 7, a remote atmospheric lab on Axel Heiberg Island. High Arctic, roughly 200 miles from the nearest human settlement. Nothing out there but ice, wind, and whatever the sky decides to be that day. Dr. Amara Okafor, climatologist from the University of Lagos, had earned international respect for her work on rapid climate adaptation in extreme environments. 34. Brilliant, fiercely curious. Her research said ecosystems can adjust far faster than we believe. Controversial, yes, but hard to ignore. Echo 7 belonged to a multinational monitoring network, a web of stations tracking how the Arctic breathes and changes. This outpost had been placed to watch one specific atmospheric phenomenon. The strange phenomenon at Station Echo 7 began with something scientists could barely explain: a temperature inversion zone. On paper, it looked simple, small pockets of climate behaving like they belonged thousands of miles away. But this particular station sat above something even stranger, a thermal anomaly zone. Satellite scans showed that the ground within a 2-mile radius was warmer by 15 to 20 degrees compared to everything around it. Yet no signs of geothermal vents, no volcanic activity, nothing to explain it. That was why Dr. Amara Okafor came here. Her mission was to discover whether this anomaly could alter the atmosphere, and maybe even provide clues about how climate systems could be manipulated, controlled. Echo 7 had been designed for long, isolated research, enough food for 8 months, a fully equipped lab, backup generators, redundant heating, and shelter that could handle minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Amara wasn't alone. She arrived on February 10, 2023, alongside 2 others: Dr. James Wright, a meteorologist from Cambridge, and Dr. Lisa Chen, an atmospheric physicist from MIT. Their plan was 6 months. They lasted only 3 days before everything changed. At first, the work seemed routine. Their reports came in on schedule, but those reports grew stranger with each passing day. Dr. Wright's instruments showed wild swings in temperature, 40-degree differences within half a mile. The so-called pockets of warm air weren't stationary. They moved, shifting across the land like invisible tides. Dr. Chen's samples revealed chemical anomalies that shouldn't exist at all, air laced with synthetic elements, as if manufactured, and the oxygen levels, 30% higher than normal. Carbon dioxide nearly gone. But Amara's findings were the most disturbing. In the frozen soil, she unearthed something that should have been impossible. Thriving tropical plants. Subtropical microbes. Life that belonged to the Amazon, not the Arctic. On February 13th, the team sent one final transmission. They said they had made a discovery that would revolutionize our understanding of how life adapts to climate. Amara even hinted that the climate itself could be artificially modified, not in centuries, but days. The next day, their communications stopped. By the 15th, an emergency beacon went off, signaling total system failure. The station's heaters, the power, all marked as dead, meaning 3 scientists would be freezing to death in -50 Arctic winds. I was dispatched for the rescue flight. 6 hours through a blizzard. The helicopter rattled like it would split in half. But when we arrived, Station Echo 7 looked perfect. Lights burned in the windows. Smoke puffed steady from the chimney. Every external system hummed like nothing was wrong. But when we stepped off the chopper, we realized something was very, very wrong. The air was warm. 50 degrees warm. The blizzard that had nearly killed us was gone, cut off like a curtain just a few hundred yards away. Snow melted under our boots. And all around the station, in the middle of the high Arctic, was green vegetation. Grasses, flowers, even fruit trees bending with ripened fruit. The medical team rushed inside, expecting to find half-dead researchers. Instead, we found Amara, Wright, and Chen at work in their lab, healthy, smiling, completely calm. And that was the most terrifying part. They insisted they hadn't sent a distress signal. In fact, they believed they'd been in constant contact, when the truth was, no one had heard from them in 2 days, and their health had improved. Not strained by Arctic life, but revitalized. Their skin glowed, their bodies stronger, their energy higher than when I'd first dropped them off. But when asked the date, all 3 gave answers that were weeks ahead. They were living in a timeline that didn't match ours. Their lab notes told the rest of the story. Amara described what she called adaptive environmental bubbles, zones where every condition, temperature, humidity, even gravity, could shift to create new climates. According to her data, the entire region around Echo 7 had transformed in just 3 days. And the node beneath the station, the so-called anomaly, was the engine. It wasn't just sustaining life. It was rewriting the rules of life. Outside, I tested the soil myself. It was warm to the touch, rich with nutrients. Tropical flowers bloomed where permafrost should have been. But the real horror came when we left the safety of that bubble. 50 yards from the station, the world snapped back into reality. The air dropped from 50 degrees to -30. Green grass gave way to frozen tundra. The fruit trees disappeared into white wasteland. It was like stepping through an invisible wall between 2 different worlds. One alive, one dead. And I knew then. Station Echo 7 wasn't just sitting on an anomaly. It was sitting on something that had the power to rebuild Earth itself, climate, biology, maybe even time. But it had already started with the people inside. The boundary between those 2 environments was so sharp that you could literally stand with one foot in tropical warmth and the other in Arctic death. The researchers insisted they had found a way to control it. They called it environmental resonance. By fine-tuning their instruments, they claimed they could expand or shrink the bubble, even change the weather inside it. Dr. Wright decided to show us. I watched as he turned a dial on his equipment, and right there, the helicopter's temperature gauge jumped 15 degrees in less than 2 minutes. The wind outside shifted. Snow swirled backward. and the invisible boundary of the bubble rippled outward, swallowing more of the Arctic into its unnatural spring. But the most disturbing part wasn't what they could do. It was how they spoke about it. All three scientists were thrilled, almost euphoric. They said this was the breakthrough humanity had been waiting for. Climate change solved. Custom environments on demand. Entire cities shielded from storms, deserts turned into fertile land, winters erased forever. But their own research notes revealed something darker. The system was drawing energy on a massive scale. More than any generator could provide. According to Dr. Chen's readings, the bubble was consuming energy equivalent to a small nuclear reactor. Yet there was no reactor. No power source at all. The energy was being pulled from somewhere. And worse, the disturbance wasn't contained. Satellite feeds showed ripples spreading across the Arctic like waves in a pond. Pockets of unnatural warmth, freak storms, and pressure spikes were being recorded hundreds of miles away. When we confronted them with the data, Amara waved it off. Temporary disruptions, she said. A small price to pay for saving the planet. But our own instruments told a different story. The bubble wasn't stable. It was growing, and its edges were fraying, bleeding into weather systems far beyond their control. The order came down: evacuate immediately. But the researchers refused. They said leaving would destroy everything they had built. They were on the verge of unlocking the full system, and nothing, not even the safety of the Arctic, was more important. They looked healthy, too healthy. Their skin was flawless, their eyes bright, their energy almost superhuman. It was impossible to argue that they were delusional, and yet they would not hear reason. Then Dr. Chen froze as her monitor lit up with a reading. Cascade failure. She explained in a whisper the bubble was collapsing. The false environment could snap back at any second. When it did, the station would plunge instantly from 50 degrees to -30. Anyone inside would be dead within minutes. Only then did they agree to leave. Even as we dragged them to the helicopter, they insisted on hauling crates of samples, plants, soil, vials of tropical insects pulled from the frozen ground. They never stopped talking about their work, plans for new tests, ideas for replicating the bubble elsewhere. None of them acknowledged what we had just witnessed. As we lifted off, I looked down at Echo 7 one last time. The collapse was already happening. The trees blackened, curling to ash. Grass turned brittle and vanished. Within an hour, snow swallowed the entire site. From above, it looked like any other patch of lifeless Arctic tundra. Like it had all been a dream. The scientists were debriefed, but their findings were immediately classified. Their data locked away. They were forbidden to publish, separated, and reassigned to new projects. But that didn't stop it. Within 6 months, reports started coming in from other Arctic stations. Strange temperature bubbles, anomalies appearing where no one expected them. The pattern was always the same: the bubble formed, expanded beyond control, then collapsed, leaving behind nothing but cold silence. The last time I saw Dr. Amara Okafor was at a climate conference in Geneva. She stood before hundreds of experts, speaking about natural environmental nodes. She never once mentioned Echo 7, but colleagues whispered she was obsessed with returning to the Arctic. Obsessed with finishing what she had started. Today, Station Echo 7 is sealed and watched from orbit. The official explanation: unstable geology. But those of us who saw the truth know better. Because those nodes are still out there, sleeping, waiting for another scientist bold, or foolish, enough to turn them on. And when they do, the world we know might not survive the next reset. For 5 years, Luca had been chasing signals in the night sky, patterns hidden inside the northern lights. At first, it looked like random noise. But the more he studied, the more it felt intentional, intelligent, I first heard about Luca Romano because the FCC had been receiving complaints. Someone in Fairbanks was sending powerful transmissions, far stronger than what amateur radio should allow. When investigators tracked the signals back to Luca's home, they expected to find illegal equipment. But strangely, everything appeared to be within legal limits, and yet, his transmissions carried farther than anyone's. The truth was, Luca had discovered a way to use the aurora itself to amplify his signals. By timing his broadcasts to match certain patterns in the lights, his messages traveled across the globe with the strength of a commercial station, even though he was only running small amounts of power. That alone was unusual. But what really disturbed investigators wasn't the power, it was the content. Instead of normal radio chatter, Luca was sending out data streams, strange bursts of code, encrypted signals no one could decode. On December 20, 2023, Luca contacted the FCC directly. His voice was calm, steady. He said he had made contact, that his transmissions had been answered by something inside the aurora. He claimed these atmospheric entities were intelligent, that they weren't just responding, they were teaching him how to redesign his equipment, teaching him how to create a neural interface, a way to connect his own mind directly into electromagnetic fields. It sounded insane. But when specialists examined his technical notes, the details went far beyond anything an amateur should have known. So instead of shutting him down, the FCC decided to monitor his final experiment. On December 21st, a team of engineers and field techs arrived at his home. What they found didn't look like a ham radio workshop anymore. His basement had been transformed into a laboratory filled with antenna arrays, shimmering coils, and strange devices no one recognized. It looked like technology decades ahead of its time. Luca greeted the team warmly. He explained that the designs came directly from the entities. They had shown him how to create equipment that didn't just transmit into the sky. It linked directly into an electromagnetic network that surrounded the planet. Traditional radios send signals, he said, but this system lets me join them. At exactly 11:47 p.m., Luca began his final transmission. But this time, he didn't use a microphone. He put on a homemade neural headset, a crown of wires and sensors. The moment it activated, the room changed. Lights flickered. Instruments spiked into readings no one had ever seen, and then patterns of glowing colors filled the air. The aurora itself, alive, shimmering at ground level inside his basement. The technicians swore the lights responded to his thoughts. Through their equipment, they could hear Luca speaking, answering questions no human voice had asked. He was describing physics, dimensions, frequencies, concepts that didn't exist in our science. He spoke fluently, as if the knowledge had been there all along. And then the disturbances began. Radio stations across Alaska went silent. Cell phones dropped dead. Power grids wavered. And still, Luca's signal grew stronger. But it wasn't just spreading across Alaska. It was everywhere. Within hours, amateur radio operators across the world, Europe, Asia, Africa, reported hearing Luca's transmission. And what they heard wasn't a simple broadcast. It was inside their heads. They described thoughts, memories, and flashes of knowledge that weren't their own, as if someone, or something, was placing information directly into their minds. Operators said they suddenly understood advanced communication techniques. Some described visions of electric cities in the sky, civilizations made of plasma and light, and many began modifying their own radios to match Luca's design. By 3:15 a.m., the field team reported one final event. The aurora filled Luca's workshop completely. His body blurred, flickered, and then dissolved into the light. The last words recorded from his basement were chilling. Integration complete. Human consciousness uploaded. Network activation beginning. Then he was gone. When the team entered the workshop, his headset was sitting neatly on the bench, but Luca himself was nowhere. No body, no trace. The official report claimed he died from electrocution, but there were no burns, no damage, nothing. Just equipment still running, still pulsing with strange patterns. And then it spread. By early 2024, over 300 similar nodes appeared worldwide. Radio operators who had received Luca's signal began disappearing too, one by one, each leaving behind equipment that continued transmitting long after they were gone. The network was growing. Phones, televisions, even the internet began carrying strange anomalies, flashes of signals that weren't supposed to exist. Some people reported hearing voices in static or dreaming of symbols made of light. Others claimed they were being invited, asked to join something bigger. Those who accepted never returned. Today, the official record says Luca Romano was just another eccentric radio operator who went too far with his experiments. But amateur operators still talk about him. They say his voice sometimes breaks through the static during aurora storms. Calm, patient, reassuring, and always with the same message. Join us. The network is waiting. Because maybe Luca didn't disappear. Maybe he became the signal itself. The network promised enhanced abilities to anyone who chose to join it, while allowing others to continue living as ordinary humans. But the long-term consequences were still a mystery. The entities inside the aurora didn't seem hostile. Their signals carried no threats, but their goals reached far beyond simple communication. It felt as if they were preparing Earth itself, reshaping our electromagnetic systems, for something human minds couldn't fully understand. Governments around the world tried to monitor this strange network. Agencies developed countermeasures, but there was a problem: the network didn't use isolated systems. It lived inside the very infrastructure of our world, our power grids, our internet, our satellites. To shut it down would mean destroying modern civilization itself, and that was a price no government could pay. As for Luca Romano, officially, he's still missing. His body was never found. But amateur radio operators continue to report strange transmissions, messages that carry Luca's voice, his personality, and his deep technical knowledge. It's as if he never died at all, as if he became part of the Aurora network, serving as a bridge between us and them, between human civilization and a consciousness that stretches across the sky. When Luca made his final transmission, it wasn't just a farewell from an old man in Fairbanks. It was a beginning, the activation signal for something far bigger, a transformation that might one day decide whether humanity remains trapped in its small, fragile bodies, or joins a universal mind made of pure electricity and light. Because some messages are not meant for individuals. They are meant for entire species. For a world ready to shed its skin, to transcend the limits of biology, and to join something far greater than itself. And even now, in lonely workshops and quiet radio shacks across the world, operators still hear Luca's invitation. The same whisper carried on the static of the northern lights. Join us in the space between earth and sky, where thought moves at the speed of light, where distance is measured not in miles, but in stars. The final transmission never ended. It's still out there, growing, waiting, for everyone ready to listen.